DMs are on this everyday run, absolutely terrified of carbohydrates. I've heard what McDougall has said, I've heard what you've said, I've heard what others said, but it doesn't click with me. And the problem is we've formed these beliefs, haven't we, over an ideology surrounding food over years and years and years, in many cases decades. And so to reverse that, or think we can easily reverse that, is a bit naive, isn't it? It is tough. So I understand the person asking this question. I understand the wider context of how they used to think in the past. It's easy for me. I've got so much clarity on how effective carbs are for weight loss. So it's easy for me when I get a DM like that to initially be like, oh my goodness, come on. But I have to take it back to how I was before, how I believed before, and then I'm like, yeah, of course, that makes me more considerate. But I have so much clarity and confidence on and for carbohydrate that for me, it's just a no-brainer. It is, my stance on this is just straight down the middle. They are by far and away the three macronutrients. If you're really unfamiliar with this, the three macronutrients: protein, fats, and carbohydrates. Out of those three, carbohydrates, without a shadow of a doubt in my mind, the most slimming of those macronutrients. So to have a carbohydrate-rich diet is absolutely advantageous from a weight loss perspective in my mind. Now, from a health point of view, many of these carbohydrate sources, many of these plant food carbohydrate sources also come with a wealth of nutrients, vitamins, and minerals. So it's not just this aspect of weight loss that we need to think about here, but things like fruit, things like whole grains, especially things like legumes as well. Most vegetables as well are more rich in carbohydrates than anything else. These are nutrient-packed foods, folks. So if you're missing out on lots of these because of your fear of carbohydrates, just because what you've been told from a weight loss perspective, you're really missing out. You're really missing the boat here, I would suggest. Here's a big point on this. Everyone, not everyone, I'm speaking broadly, but so many of us lump carbohydrates into one category. Okay, so fizzy drinks, cookies, potatoes, rice, they're all carbohydrates. They must be bad. They must be evil. No. This is way too binary. This is way too simplistic, okay? These are foods that are rich in carbohydrates, but they also have a bunch of other things in too. So to just merely label them as carbs, and therefore because they're carbs, they're bad, oh, wow. This is really simplistic. This is way too simplistic. This really lacks scientific founding. I can't stand it. And I get why people need these simple rules about the macronutrients and about what to eat and what not to eat with weight loss. I get it. It needs to be bite-sized. Sometimes I make my stuff sound very simplistic on purpose as well. So I understand the game, quote-unquote. However, that is just such a simplistic outlook. So to lump fizzy drinks and rice and whole grains all into the same category, utterly madness. Sure, fizzy drinks, cookies and whatnot, they have carbohydrates in them. They also have fats in them, or varying, it depends what item we're talking about in particular, but they might have fats in them, they might have protein as well. And, of course, not forgetting they might be heavily processed. So yeah, sure, they come from a carbohydrate source. Perhaps it's been ground, down again, stripping away lots of the fiber, the other good vitamins and minerals, perhaps increasing the calorie density as well through processing. And so we've got to figure these things out too. Maybe there's refined sugars in there, maybe there's oils in there, okay? Maybe there's extra additives, other artificial little goodies, if you will, little nasties more appropriately, in those foods. So when we say carbohydrates, let's talk specifically about the macronutrient, okay, rather than some food derivative of carbohydrates that could be processed, could be refined, there could be a bunch of the other macronutrients thrown in too. So let's get that right too. So again, this is where this stems from. People have such simplistic thinking around food that they honestly can't tell you the difference between a potato, a white potato, in my mind, one of the best foods, hands down, for weight loss, would you believe, and a fizzy drink. They can't tell the difference, or a cookie. They cannot tell the difference between the two. They think just because both are high in carbohydrates, that means they're automatically bad, and it's bewildering. It's not bewildering, because I've been there, so I get it. But to me now, this is so one-sided. I see so little good argument on the other side of on this sort of anti-carb train. I hear such appalling arguments from the anti-carb movement that, for me, this is such a no-brainer. There are other facets of plant-based eating that I can maybe I'm clear on myself, but I can see the bones of contention on it. I can see the criticisms. I can see the pitfalls. I'm going to share with you some of them later, such as on the omega issue. I can see why some people would believe that it's hard to get enough iron on a plant-based diet. I can see that. I have lots of ways around that. I have lots of solutions for those things, but I can understand that. On the carb thing, I cannot understand the other side. It doesn't click with me whatsoever. So for me, just to really illustrate how important I think carbs are, well, I've just told you all of that. I think they are the most effective macronutrient when it comes to slimming down, not just because of the low calorie density, the low calorie nature of carbohydrates, but also because of metabolic process and how carbohydrates are used and stored in the body versus the other macronutrients, specifically fat, which is really, really, really a different ball game altogether in terms of how that's then processed, even if the calorie amount of the fat and the carbohydrates we're eating you are the same. This also depends on whether you're in a surplus or a deficit in terms of your calories. But fat, just far less effective for weight loss, in other words. I don't want to get lost in all that stuff. But yeah, being absolutely terrified, petrified, as so many are, of carbohydrates. Please, folks, don't be. You have to trust the process here. Now, it's not that we're just increasing your carbohydrate intake, it's that we're making sure you're eating whole plant foods that are rich in carbohydrates. Now, many plant foods just happen to naturally be rich in carbohydrates, which is an indicator that you should have a carbohydrate-rich diet, since the foods you're designed to eat and the healthiest foods on the planet are carb-rich foods. You would try and put one and one together there, surely, and think, that makes sense. So, yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Lots of carbohydrates in your diet. Whole plant foods though, whole plant foods. So we're not talking about the fizzy drinks and the heavily processed things with carbs in them and lots of refined sugars as well. There are some exceptions to the thing I'm saying, but lots of refined sugars as well. But we're talking about whole grains. We're talking about legumes like beans, peas, and lentils. We're talking about potatoes. Now again, these things, they're not just carbohydrates, they have other macronutrients in them, but these are carb-rich sources, starches, and then of course the natural sugars in the likes of fruit and whatnot. Amazing for slimming, amazing for weight loss, amazing for our health and well-being in terms of what they provide as well. So absolutely essential, absolutely essential. And here's my question to you. If you're not eating lots of carbohydrates, what are you eating? What are you eating instead? Because it's likely, as it is for many people, even more animal products, perhaps lots of processed stuff as well. So if you're not eating lots of these whole plant foods that are rich in carbohydrates, what on earth are you eating? Okay, so not only is the carbohydrate macronutrient group in itself good, but it's also what lots of the foods that fall into that category yield that makes them doubly good. The vitamins, minerals, fiber they come with, and then the foods without lots of carbohydrates in them. Where's the nutritional value there? There's not a lot. There's not a lot. There are exceptions, but there's not a lot. So we have to consider this. Even the likes of nuts and seeds, which for a plant-based diet they are high-fat plant foods. You know, even those have carbohydrates in them, a reasonable amount. So, you know, way more than the likes of meat and dairy products on the whole. So, yeah, that's worth considering, certainly meat. So that's also worth considering. What are you missing out on by not eating lots of these carb-rich plant foods is what I would say to you. So this is a big mistake, number one. And personally, when I'm not having enough calories from carbohydrates, I don't feel as good, I don't work out as good, I feel a little lethargic like I do today as a result of not having enough carbohydrates, I'm sure, and not enough calories also overall. So that's another discussion for another time in terms of the difference between those two. But yeah, I don't feel good when I'm not having those things. And a plant-based diet is so naturally rich in carbohydrates in anyway, that if you were to do sort of it's extremely hard to do like a vegan keto approach or a vegan paleo approach, it's really hard to do because so many plant foods are naturally high in carbohydrates. And again, this should be a sign that we ought to have a high carbohydrate diet, given that lots of the healthiest foods on the planet contain lots of carbohydrates anyway. So this anti-carb movement, can't get on board with it, not even one sort of argument that I could concede on or even wish to entertain at this stage.